You're listening to a podcast from the South China Morning Post.
President Donald Trump's been given one more way to intimidate Beijing, if you like, before leaving office.
The U.S. House has passed a law to put Chinese companies under closer scrutiny.
They must now follow American auditing standards if they want to be listed on U.S. exchanges.
The law is expected to be signed by President Trump, and it certainly could pave the way for a number of Chinese companies to be delisted.
Hello and welcome to the US-China Trade War Update with me, Finbarr Bermingham, on the political economy desk at the South China Morning Post. We're bang in the middle of the fourth wave of coronavirus pandemic here in Hong Kong. Just as things were opening up, they closed them right back down again. But the show must go on, and this week myself and our political economy editors John Carter and Zhou Xin are joining you from our homes dotted around Hong Kong Island to discuss a week that is just getting more and more dramatic. We kind of expected that Donald Trump wouldn't go quietly, but even as he continues to protest Joe Biden's election win at home, he's lobbing a series of exit grenades in China's direction abroad. From more bans on Xinjiang cotton, to Chinese companies being threatened with being kicked off the New York Stock Exchange, to cutting off China's blue chip maker from US supplies. Take cover, the barrage is coming in thick and fast. After we talk through the news of the week, we've got a bit of a podcast exclusive for you this week. Those with long memories will remember the arduous and at times fierce negotiations between the US and China over China's accession to the WTO all through the 90s into the early 2000s. It went on for almost 15 years, and at the heart of it for much of that was Long Yongtu, who along with Madame Wu Yi was China's chief trade negotiator. Long Yongtu was interviewed by our business editor Eugene Tang at the Post's China conference this week, and we're delighted to bring you that interview in the second part of the show. One to look forward to. Another topsy-turvy week as we see the last gasps of the Trump administration and the grenades being thrown China's direction on the way out. We've talked about the trade war at length, the tech war, the currency war, and in the past, John Carter has talked about the prospect of financial war. This week, John, we saw US legislators move to install rules that would force Chinese companies listed on US stock exchange to comply with US audit oversight laws or audit oversight rules, and if not, they can get kicked off. John, is this what you had in mind when you spoke on the podcast a number of months ago about a financial war?
Well, it's part of it, and this is it goes back to a number of Chinese companies that have been listed in the U.S. who suddenly went bust or had very serious financial problems. Luckin Coffee being the most recent. They overestimated their sales. They faked their sales numbers by hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course, that had a profound impact on the price of their stock and traded in the US. And so there's been a movement for quite some time in this direction, and it's culminated in this, which is to say that Chinese companies have to comply with U.S. accounting rules if they want to list in the United States. And the SEC and proposing the rule initially, which has just been passed by Congress, said it was for the protection of American investors, but it's also directed specifically at China, which is yet a part of this financial war, which could include, and this is something the Chinese are very concerned about, is being restricted from access to the U.S.-dominated international payment system. That would be the nuclear option by the United States, which would really hurt Chinese firms, but it also hurt U.S. firms. It would be a type of major event that would really rock the international economy and potentially international financial markets.
Yeah, just to illustrate the scale of Chinese companies invested in or listed on US markets, more than 210 Chinese firms with a combined market capitalization of more than $2 trillion were listed on the major exchanges as of October. Those figures from the recent congressional report by the US China Economic and Security Review Commission. Zhou Xin, is this something that Chinese companies are going to be worried about? Is it something they're going to be able to comply with?
Well, I think for the Chinese companies listed in the U.S. market, they are really, caught in the middle, and they basically have no choices. As we can see, some big Chinese companies, including our owner, Alibaba, has already have a dual listing in Hong Kong. I think this is a kind of, people are preparing for the kind of decoupling between China and the US. Of course, no business will hope that there will be conflict between the two biggest markets in the world. But when this is happening, companies has to make preparations. And also, although China's regulators has been quite positive, saying, we are willing to work with the SEC, we are willing to solve this auditing issue. But as everyone can see, this process won't be easy because at the end of the day, it is up to China to hand over the law audit documents, law accounting records to the U.S. regulators, and this is not something that can be done easily.
No, not at all. Just the usual caveat. Alibaba is the owner of the South China Morning Post. The second one we were going to touch on briefly was the second grenade, shall we say, is just this morning our time. It's Friday here in Hong Kong. The Trump administration added China's top chip maker, SMIC, and its oil giant, CNOOC, to a blacklist of alleged Chinese military companies. This is going to escalate tensions further. This list has been floating around for a while. There's now 35 companies on it. Zhou Xin, how do you read this? And by going for SMIC, is it once again a sort of case of the US authorities going after one of China's crown jewels?
Well, this is potentially very big because, as we all know, China has been trying very hard to be more independent in terms of chip production, so that it can reduce reliance on imported ones. And SMIC is by far the best hope for China to do so, because China has launched this state subsidy program, encouraging basically every city to set up its chip plant, but most of them are just trying to take some money from the central government rather than really producing reliable and usable chips. As we can, we reported that in the city of Wuhan, that's how the ambition of the municipal government quickly collapsed, and the CEO hid from Taiwan, he told SCMP on the record that it's a nightmare.
Yes, I remember Sydney's story, wasn't it?
Yes, and Wuhan is certainly not the worst. I mean, there are so many chip projects across China. Not many of them will be successful, but SMIC will be successful. It has the money, it has the best technology available, it has best policies available for it. So this is China's best hope. So it's very interesting to see how SMIC can handle this kind of U.S. sanctions. Can it really, find a way to continue to grow, or with this new U.S. sanction, SMIC has to find other ways to develop the chip products, and this will be very interesting. And if SMIC cannot grow healthily, then China's ambition in the chip will certainly see a big blow.
John, this is coming at a very interesting time. Obviously, we're seeing the Trump administration trying to squeeze in as much anti-China legislation as possible. But from China's perspective, it comes at a time when it's trying to be self-sufficient. We saw the 5-year plan lay this in the blueprints for this. Dual circulation policy has been widely cited, through which China will try and nurture its domestic champions and will become less reliant on what has been called a hostile international environment. So the listing of a company like SMIC, the leading chip maker in China, what size of a spanner does it throw in the works?
Well, potentially a big spanner. Obviously, first of all, it confirms the Chinese view of what the external environment is going to be like, at least in the short run under the remaining Trump administration. But it also limits China's ability to import technology and work with Western companies or U.S. companies in order to improve their independence, to upgrade their systems so that they can be independent. And so at the very least, it delays their progress. It's not clear that it will stop it. And I would note that a very big question is, how the Biden administration is going to approach this. This blacklist prevents U.S. firms from doing business with these Chinese companies without a special license. Now, the Biden administration could turn around and say, okay, we'll give you special licenses to return to business with these firms. We don't know that that's going to happen. President-elect Biden said in an interview with the New York Times this week that he had no immediate plans to reduce trade tariffs or to talk about renegotiating the Phase 1 trade deal. In other words, steady as we go on trade with China. But that does not mean in the longer run, in an effort to improve relations, that the U.S. might ease up on the sanctions that Trump is busily putting in place before he leaves office.
Yeah, and in the second half of the show, we'll have China's former trade chief, top negotiator Long Yongtu, echo your sentiments there, John. But just to drill down on the Biden interview, he didn't say too much about China, but what he did say sort of confirmed what people had expected. As you say, he will keep the tariffs in place. He will conduct a full review of that. He will build this coalition of allies, and he said the best China strategy is one which is done alongside allies. Zhou Xin, was the Biden interview, I'm guessing it wasn't really picked up much in domestic media in China, but has there been any chatter about this and what he said just in general?
I think the Biden's interview with the New York Times is, surprisingly, Beijing is very quiet about this. Basically there was not many comments, not many responses. And I guess one reason for Beijing is that it's kind of expected. No one in Beijing was hoping that Biden, the first thing he would do was lift the tariffs. And also secondly, it is the tariffs, although it's kind of inconvenience for China, but China has get used to it. It certainly didn't hurt China's export much. If you look at the data, there are still like 25% tariffs on 250 billion and another 7.5% on about 100 billion. But this tariff isn't really a drag on Chinese exports or Chinese economy. It's just another a small cost effect. So it's not a big deal. So for the Chinese side, I think Beijing is more looking forward to what overall strategy is, instead of hoping Biden will do something on very specific issues before he assumes the position in the White House.
Yeah. The final grenade I wanted to discuss this morning was the withhold release order issued by the US Department of Homeland Security on Wednesday. The US government said that it would start blocking the import of all cotton products made by the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, XPCC, citing concerns that this sprawling quasi-military entity in the northwest of China is responsible for widespread use of forced labour. This is something that's been in the works for a while. We had expected it a couple of months ago, and it's also happening at a point when we may see another Xinjiang bill, the forced labour bill, pass before the lame duck is out. A whole host of Xinjiang legislation is hitting in the dying days of the Trump administration. I just wanted to draw attention to a couple of things on this. I mean, it's more than just XPCC. This is a massive organization that's responsible for about a third of China's cotton production, and China is responsible for about a third of the world's cotton production. So it's not a small matter to get this out of your supply chain. And the people I've been speaking to have been really struggling with getting their heads around how they're going to do this. These are industry people, companies, lawyers, and they've also been wondering how it's going to be enforced. The second point is that I wanted to draw attention to is a statement by the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security's Acting Deputy Secretary, Ken Cuccinelli. The tone of this really struck me. He said, DHS is taking the lead to enforce our laws to make sure human rights abusers, including US businesses, are not allowed to manipulate our system in order to profit from slave labour. Made in China is not just a country of origin, it is a warning label. John, fierce words from Cuccinelli there, and really illustrative in that one final sentence of how the tone of the conversation has really dipped in the past months.
It has, and the issue of human rights, and this is the allegations of forced labor, of incarceration for the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang province is likely to be a bigger issue under the Biden administration than it was under the Trump administration. The Trump administration came to the game relatively late, but is trying to catch up as part of its overall China containment strategy. But I would expect it. First of all, the statement that you mentioned is from one of the obvious hawks in the Trump administration, but it is not an uncommon view in Washington. There is a strong bipartisan consensus that the United States needs to confront China on these type of issues. And as you say, there's very good chance that this forced labor bill will pass Congress before the Congress adjourns for the year. So that speaks to the whole issue of human rights and whether, and I think that the Biden administration will focus more on that than the Trump administration has.
Yes, and Zhou Xin, you think this is something that the Chinese policymakers would be worried about, going after XPCC, sanctioning Xinjiang officials, and the continued assault on this, which will probably continue into the Biden administration?
Well, I think for China, the big picture is that China-U.S. relations will not see any significant improvement under Biden. So the issue is to keep it from worsening. One of the best known U.S.-China experts in Beijing said, Beijing maybe should recognize the fact that China-U.S. is in a kind of strategic competition relationship, rather than wishfully thinking that U.S.-China can continue to be strategic partners or whatever. So this is a big change in the mindset in Beijing, because only a few years ago, the default mode in China was U.S.-China will always be, even if it's bad, it will not be. There will be a certain limit. But for now, Beijing sees no limit. So the thinking has changed. China is trying to set some bottom lines. Whatever the U.S. do, every is kind of, whether it's sanctions over Xinjiang or whether it's getting more Chinese companies on the blacklist or starting a financial war, will be seen as evidence to support the strategic judgment.
Well, that's great for this week, guys. Just quickly before we finish up, what's in the pipeline for the week ahead?
Well, on Monday, we get Chinese trade data for November. It would be important to look and see if the strong export trend continues. To remind, exports in recent months have been very strong, in large part due to exports of personal protection equipment used to combat the coronavirus, and computers and video equipment for people working and playing at home. And so exports have been stronger than expected, and we'll see if that trend continues.
Zhou Xin, anything you've got your eye on over the coming 7 days?
Oh, yes. One thing that is very interesting is that today there's a Wall Street Journal report that U.S. Department of Justice is talking with Meng Wanzhou to, for kind of negotiations so that Meng Wanzhou can be released. This will be something interesting to watch, because that's a case has been going on the last 2 years. Very interesting.
Okay. We will look forward to hearing more on that next week. Until then, thanks a million, guys, for joining us.
Just before the second half of the show, our friends on the SCMP's video team have just released a very important documentary. Have a listen to this.
In 2019, Hong Kong witnessed social and political upheaval that rocked the city to its foundations, setting off shockwaves that continue to reverberate today.
The people knew that this is so dangerous. Anybody could be just brought back to China for trial.
The definitive documentary on the Hong Kong protests offers an in-depth look at the dramatic story of a city at a crossroads. It draws from extensive video footage, exclusive interviews with those caught up in the conflict, and unparalleled access to ground zero reporting by our award-winning journalists. China's Rebel City is a companion presentation to the book Rebel City, Hong Kong's Year of Water and Fire, that was published by the Post in June. You can watch China's Rebel City online, on demand, on YouTube, Facebook, or the South China Morning Post homepage, scmp.com.
You're now going to hear a chunk of Eugene Tang's interview with Long Yongtu. As I said at the top of the show, Long was China's chief trade negotiator during the long talks on joining the WTO. He's known in China as a reformer. He wants to see China's economy open up, and he wants China to engage in free trade. He's also considered an eminence grise. That is, he is a hyper well-connected individual among the current apparatus in Beijing. So it's great to get his thoughts on the show.
President Xi has attached great importance to China's import-export. That means that we are willing and able to import more from the world, especially in the difficult time for many of the countries. And another way is that maybe China could invest more in some other countries so as to create some capacity and also to restore some of the disrupted production lines and supply chain. And I think that could be also a very important way for China to do something for the rest of the world. Of course, we are hopeful that we can be very strong in the cooperation in anti-pandemic disease and provide the vaccine and many other things.
Let's talk briefly about global trade and trade blocs. Now, China obviously recently signed the RCEP trade agreement with several countries, including the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, South Korea and Japan. Now, Chinese officials have consistently said that they would also be open to joining the CPTPP, which is the Pacific Trade Partnership, which is essentially RCEP plus the United States, Canada, Peru, Chile, and Mexico. Now, most trade experts think that China would be unlikely to be able to meet the terms of the deal on issues like SOE reforms. Do you view this as mainly rhetoric from China, or is this a serious interest to expand membership into the CPTPP?
Yes, let's go back to the TPP originally being negotiated at that time. And I can tell you, I was one of the people very strongly supporting China to be open to TPP because I see a lot of advantages of being constructing parties of TPP because world trade is developing and there are more and more new issues and technology and, for instance, many of the other things. So China should be update its trade practice to the more advanced and new high quality, high standard trade rules, and that's good for China. So even during that time, I still remember Premier Li Keqiang in a Boao Forum for Asia saying that China take an open attitude to TPP, and we sincerely hope it could be successful. So even at that time, before TPP was become an agreement, China still already took a very open attitude. And this time, when the Chinese leaders say we should seriously concerned to participate in CPTPP, I think it's a serious initiative because we believe CPTPP is high quality, high standard trade agreement. It will be good for the whole world if the Asian Pacific countries can accept TPP as a whole. And on that basis, it will promote the trade negotiations in the framework of WTO and many other trade, other regional framework. So I hope that CPTPP could be a very important instrument to promote the trade liberalization and the trade facilitation. As people say that China cannot meet the terms of CPTPP, I think this is groundless. And you see the CPTPP membership is very diversified, including some more developed countries than China, like Japan, Korea, Singapore. But it also have Vietnam, Malaysia, and the other countries in it. If Vietnam and Singapore, and they also have very strong state-owned industry, if they can meet the terms of CPTPP, not China. And also, China is engaged very strongly in the state-owned enterprise reform. And if by participating CPTPP, we can get some new ideas, even we can get some pressure from the participation with CPTPP to accelerate China's state-owned enterprise reform. That's a good thing for China, just like we did in the accession to WTO. It exerted a lot of pressure in China's many areas to accelerate the economic reform. That is why the accession of WTO has played such an important role in China, because it did provide some healthy international pressure for China to accelerate economic reform. We think that's a good thing, because just like one student, if you want to make progress, you should get some competition and pressure from your fellow classmate. I think that's a good thing.
Let's return to talking about U.S.-China trade relations for a while. Now, the position of the U.S. trade representative, whom you were familiar with during your work on negotiations to join the WTO, took an outsized significance under Robert Lighthizer in the Trump administration. Now, there is very much speculation as to whether this replacement candidate would have any in-depth experience of dealing with China. Is this something that China's policymakers are watching very closely?
Well, I do not think so, because the trade policy of one country, including the United States, is decided by its highest leadership, the president, and also influenced by many interested groups, by business community. And USTR, of course, plays some important role, but it's not decisive. And during my terms as the chief negotiator, I have survived 3 or 4 or 5 USTR, and it doesn't make too much difference to me whether they have changed the USTR, because they basically are consistent in their trade interest. And of course, there's some difference in style, some difference in the focus, the emphasis. But I do not think the change for USTR will play a fundamental part in changing the whole trade policy, because both countries, United States, all work for its own country's interest.
So, which begs the question: in the past 4 years, the U.S.-China relations, trade relations, have gone to the deep end. So, to what extent do you think that deterioration was a reflection of Lighthizer's personal biases? Or to what extent did it reflect the broader consensus of U.S. policymakers against China?
I think I do not know the inside story of how the U.S. administration was functioning all this time. But I do not think it is fair to single out some person to be responsible for certain trade policy, because it represents a kind of leadership, but the broader consensus should be based on the much broader interest of U.S. side. So I still think that we do not. It is not necessary to single out some persons to be responsible for certain trade policy.
Right. Of course, 2 names have now been touted as possible replacements for Mr. Lighthizer. Catherine Tai, a lawyer on the House and Means Committee, and also Jimmy Gomez, a representative from California. Catherine Tai, of course, comes with a lot of legal background and trade background and speaks Mandarin. We'll see how that goes. Now, you also mentioned about earlier on that dialogue is essential and crucial to maintaining and sustaining the relationship of two economic powers. There have been a lot of calls to resume the biannual strategic and economic dialogues that were part of the President Hu's time and also continued on during the Bush and Obama administrations. Now, do you think these dialogues were ultimately useful in addressing some of the more fundamental issues and questions in US-China relations in the past?
Yes, certainly. I think this mechanism could be very important, especially at current time, because we have not been having serious dialogue for a long time. And it's high time for us to resume this kind of mechanism, which will get involved not only high-level trade policy makers of both sides, but also some working-level people in this kind of dialogue. I do believe that if this kind of dialogue, including some other mechanism, could be resumed, there would be already half done to repair the U.S. trade relationship. So I strongly support the resumption of this kind of mechanism.
Of course, the dual circulation economic policy that we are currently talking about is, I remember more than 10 years ago, this was one of the recommendations made for China to try and rebalance its current account gap and trade gap with the United States. So 10 years later, we are seeing this being executed as a policy priority in China. So looks like it does take time, but things do happen. Now, if you were to resume these dialogues, what would be, say, the top 3 or top 5 topics that you offer to put on the table for discussion?
I could think out some of the things that I think it would be very important. For instance, trade deficit. I still believe that there should be no major problem if two countries have some trade deficit or trade surplus. It's important how to address them. But I think the current U.S.-China trade deficit is too big, and we have to make efforts to narrow it down and make it to a healthy, reasonable, and acceptable level. So I hope that we can have a serious talk with our U.S. colleagues to how to narrow the gap through a kind of a dynamic process, through the market mechanism. And we do not believe that too much administrative interference to resolve the trade gap is the right choice. We have to depend more on the market, because the market knows how to address these kind of issues. And that's important. That's a very important issue. And secondly, I think we have to address a serious issue about protection of IPR, because the protection of IPR on both sides are very major concern. China is trying to create an innovative country. So we are also attaching importance to protection of IPR. So the kind of negotiation, the kind of agreements that we can take and reach with the United States can be a healthy pressure for us to tighten our hands on the protection of IPR, because the meaning of entrepreneurs and the scientists and technical people also tell me that it's important to tighten the protection of IPR within China. We have to do a lot of things on this. So the international trade could provide some good opportunity for us to resolve some of the issues. This is my experience during my term as the chief negotiator. And U.S. also have a lot of concern on that. Even European Union, Japan, they all have a lot of concern. It's a good thing that the protection of IPR, I think, should be a world consensus. And that is the only way to accelerate technological development. And this is good not only for China, US, but for the whole world. I hope this could be a very important subject. Another subject, of course, is how we can practice the principle of anti-discrimination towards the enterprises of different countries. It's horrible to see a country use its whole country's administrative power to hit, to attack one single Chinese enterprise. It is unbelievable. It creates a very bad precedent in the world trade relationship. I hope this is something that could be resolved, and otherwise there will be no certainty, no sense of certainty for the enterprises. That's no good for the trade development, for the technological development. So I hope this could be also an issue that we can seriously address.
Right. You mentioned addressing the trade gap, protection of intellectual property rights, and finally, if I can paraphrase you, ensuring a level playing field, non-discrimination against proprietors and private enterprises. How about the coronavirus pandemic that we are currently facing, the biggest public health crisis the world has ever seen in decades? Is there room for collaboration between China and the United States?
In pandemic, you mean?
Yes.
You mean the anti-pandemic?
Yes.
I think, of course, there's a lot of rooms for that, because China is many Chinese are a little bit worried about to see that the pandemic is still not being controlled in the United States, being a very big country and with a huge population. So we seriously hope that the pandemic in the United States could be controlled as soon as possible. And I hope that we could also exchange some of the, if we can have a joint committee to exchange how China has controlled the pandemic in a reasonably short time, and what kind of measures could be taken. And I think that could be useful for them. Of course, we're not teaching them. We just tell them what happened in China. And also, maybe we can have a joint group to study the origin of this pandemic, because that caused a lot of concerns on the side of the U.S. people. And we have to give a true story to them and to clarify some misunderstanding about these issues. And I think that's also can improve the atmosphere of China-U.S. relationship, because some ordinary Americans get a lot of not true story from certain quarters. So it's a good thing for a joint group of two countries plus, I think plus WHO and some other international organization together to find the origin of the pandemic, and give a true story, not only to Americans but also to the people of the world. And that's good for improved atmosphere.
Thanks for listening to this week's show. I'm Finbarr Bermingham on the SCMP's Political Economy Desk. Keep up to date with all things US-China trade, all details on the Chinese economy at scmp.com. You can follow us on Twitter at SCMP Economy. I am at FBirmingham. Until next week, stay safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, keep your distance.
For more podcasts from the South China Morning Post, head to scmp.com, where you can hear more about technology, trade, culture, and society.